everyone and welcome to another episode of Rift News, the show that's having a hard time staying on schedule with all the Legends of Runeterra lore still waiting to be covered. This week, on top of all the videos teasing what's coming in the future, Riot also released some posts with additional info. And because I know that most of you would rather stab yourselves in the eye than to read anything, let me cover all the important bits for you. So without further ado, let's start with what is happening in League. As we await patch 11.6, which should release all the new Battle Academia skins, Riot sneakily started a new promotion. It seems like some creators got partnered with Grubhub, and they can give away some masterwork chests and keys. I'll be honest here, I had no idea what Grubhub was, so I had to Google it. And apparently it is a food delivery service which only works in the US. And to really make sure I don't accidentally order anything, the Grubhub websites are blocked for anyone outside the US. So I can't even give you further details. So as smart as it is for Riot to partner with a food delivery service during these times, all I know about it is that it exists. But of course, after this promotion, Riot released their newest iteration of the Riot Please series. This time they called it LOL Please, because this video focused on League PC exclusively. So, let's sum up what we learned from this. First, they dived into the overall state of the game. Here they mentioned that although they gave League some really interesting new items, these items were overshadowed by others like Sunfire or Gore Drinker, which everyone bought. And one of the reasons for this is that it gave players a lot of raw stats and additional healing. Then, on the opposite spectrum, we got items such as Chemtech Purifier, which was almost never bought, and so that item will be bumped up. They also mentioned that they will try to fill in some non-mythic item gaps. And as an example, they mentioned an enchanter item that will help dealing with teams that are one-shotting your carries. And to counter some of the unstoppable split pushing, they will also offer top laners a new anti-split pushing tank item. Then, going back to the mythic items, they mentioned that they will be rebalancing items which pretty much defined certain champions. For example, Sunfire was built on 80% of the tanks. Post-nerf they are aiming at 40% instead. Assassins are in a similar boat, with Duskblade dominating the meta. AD carries were mentioned to be pretty well balanced, but on the opposite side there are also mages and enchanters, whose items are quite underwhelming, so they will try to give them some more love. Then, after addressing what's happening with the items, they talked about burst damage and healing. By design, with the new items, Riot did actively try to avoid adding more burst damage into the game, but we all know that didn't really work out. And so, the bursty champions who were usually able to one-shot a carry or a support, with the right items, started one-shotting everyone. As a result, Riot will be changing items such as Duskblade, Lichbane or Luden's Echo. Related to that, healing from items and runes has also become a problem. When one laner has some healing and the other one doesn't, it essentially means that one of them can't trade damage. When they do, they will have to go back, and that starts a snowball for the enemy. As a side effect, that also meant that grievous wounds became mandatory. And so, Riot will be changing items such as Moonstone, Ravenous Hunter, Gore Drinker, or Ravenous Hydra. Somewhat related to these, Riot then also talked about snowballing in general. Every time they do a major shakeup of the game, snowballing becomes an issue. And so, with this year's upcoming preseason, they will focus on dealing with it. I think everyone can agree that when you are behind, you simply don't know what to do, besides waiting for the enemy to make a mistake. And so, Riot is exploring ways to give the losing teams new plays that could get them back into the game. But that's all we learned when it comes to gameplay. Then they talked about the client. Here, you know, just like every time Riot mentions the client, they know the client can be painful sometimes. And they are slowly making it better. In 2020, they drastically cut the memory it consumed. And in 2021, they will look into all the social tabs. And they will try to fix your friends disappearing. In the client, I mean. They can't fix your real-life issues. Next, and perhaps the most interesting topic Riot talked about, is game clarity. Here we learned that even as Riot gets to work on the craziest skins, their priority is to keep the same competitive integrity. In other words, you should always be able to tell who you're fighting and what can they do to you. So the first thing Riot focuses on is the silhouette of a champion. Here Riot needs to make sure that all champions have a unique silhouette, but also that it stays the same no matter what skin they are using. They used Senna as an example. When you look at her, the first thing you notice is the massive gun. And that alone is enough to make her stand apart. But what's even cooler about her is that because the gun is so noticeable, they can go wild with all the other effects around her. Because no matter what they do, you will always see the gun above everything else. Then they also gave us an example of a bad silhouette. From all the champions, Lee Sin doesn't really have anything to make him stand apart. He is really just a stick figure. And what makes him at least slightly unique are his wonky animations. But of course, this becomes a problem when you give him legendary skins, which change his animations entirely. This is why when Dragonmancer Lee Sin arrived on PvE, in-game some people didn't even know what champion he was. And so, looking forward, Riot will pay attention to these issues a bit more. And the reason why they mentioned it now is because in the next part, finally, they mentioned some new skins. Of course, we already knew that the Space Groove skin line was coming. It was originally teased with the Cat Crank and the Lux skin. But in this video, they revealed a modeled version of the NASA skin. And honestly, I couldn't be happier with how close it is to the original concept. This makes me really excited for the Blitzcrank skin. Unfortunately, besides the NASAs, we didn't get to see anyone else. But we did learn that the next champion will be part of this skin line. Now, we have talked about this many times on this channel before, so I doubt it is a spoiler at this point. But all the lore heavily implies that the next champion will be Isolde. She is a seamstress. That's why you can see the needle here. And the icon on the emblem is the same one Viego has on his ring and on his sword. So, this pretty much confirms that we are getting a Space Groove Isolde. But here I would like to mention that Space Groove was originally teased with this image. Most people assumed that the three skins shown here would be Kiana, Oriana and Syndra. But I have to say, it would be really cool if one of these was Isolde the entire time. However, that is everything from this video. But that is still not it for League. On top of this video, Riot released a really cool post talking more about the silhouettes and the clarity in-game. So let's quickly go through that too. The post started with Riot's 3 unbreakable vows. These are based around the ability to understand what is happening in League and respond to it. First of all, gameplay should be clearly conveyed. This means that you should always get a general idea of what abilities and champions do, based on their appearance. The second goal is to always preserve hierarchy. This means that big plays, usually around using ultimates, should always draw more attention than basic abilities. And finally, noise should be kept minimal. This means that champions and abilities shouldn't have too many unnecessary visual effects. These should only be reserved for the previously mentioned bigger abilities. But now, with these rules set, we get to the fun part: the silhouettes and abilities. When it comes to the silhouettes, I have to say Riot is doing an incredible job at separating their 150 champions. I strongly doubt you could ever mistake a champion for another based on their silhouettes alone. And funnily enough, very long time ago on this channel, I made a show where I let people guess what champions they were looking at based on their silhouettes. And I was able to make that show fun because Riot is really good at preserving unique silhouettes. So, if you ever wondered why Ryze was standing a bit funny, or why Brand was so hunched over, that's why. They all have to look different. But sometimes these animations add to the champion's character. For example, Ryze does look a bit more arrogant because of it, and Ivern looks even goofier. But just like it was in the video, here the post also mentions Lee Sin. His silhouette is quite bad, and it gets heavily carried by his animations. Then the post kinda repeats what the video also mentioned with Senna and her gun. Here we learned that the silhouette should also highlight the source of the champion's power, so that even if you see them for the first time, you should still know what to expect. For example, that's why Urgot's shotgun knees are so out there. And the champion's size also goes hand in hand with that. It may often hint at the champion's gameplay. So while Garen is a beefy warrior, someone like Teemo may prefer to sneak around. But then we get to the abilities. Right at the beginning, Riot showed us examples of newly updated abilities, which didn't reach the previously mentioned goals. And all of that was because these abilities were really old. So as we look at these, notice how the visual noise went drastically down, while the clarity increased. Sona's ultimate might be the best example here. Next we learned about what helps determine how much of an attention grab should an ability have. Here it is important to know how much damage it does it ground control you, can you dodge it, and how big of an impact does it have on a fight. A good example we got here is Morgana. Her auto attacks are small bursts of magic for 60 damage, while her Q, which thematically should be very similar, is actually very different. And that's because it deals more damage, it is a powerful CC, and you can dodge it. So not only does the size of the spell have to be clear, but you also need to notice it as soon as it flies out. Otherwise, you wouldn't even try to dodge it. In contrast, you can see how small Twisted Fate's stun is, because you can't even dodge it. But then you can also slap skins on top of these, and suddenly things get even more interesting. Now you also need to preserve the looks of the original ability, while theming it after a skin. Here they compared it to filling a bucket. If you go too hard on the new visuals, they sacrifice game clarity. But if you don't go hard enough, the ability won't feel satisfying. So you need to find a good balance. And next the post shows us that this also applies to the silhouettes. The skins still need to keep the same visuals. With Senna it's clear to see why her skins are working. She still has a massive gun. But for a bit more complicated champion they showed us Darius. Darius' silhouette has three main parts: the weapon, the shoulders, and the cloak. These three need to be preserved no matter what skin they give him. And in fact, if you have a look at his skins, you may notice that he does have a cloak or something on his back in all of them. The post then jumps back to the abilities, and it shows us some examples of when Riot gave abilities better clarity. First of all, when it comes to shields, they need to pop out, because they are changing the course of a fight. But then we got some examples of abilities which didn't have a lot of clarity at first, but Riot changed them later. Shanghai Scroll's Jin had an ultimate where the cone faded out at the beginning, so it felt like an unfolding scroll. However, this meant that at the beginning the ultimate was essentially invisible. Also, Dawnbringer Soraka's ultimate used to show an angelic figure. However, this got quite distracting when it showed on all 5 team members in a fight. That's why now it only appears above Soraka herself. And finally, this takes us to the last 3 points in this post. All abilities should be visible on all maps. Transforming skins should only be shown during home guard or other empowering effects. And cosmetic animations such as recalls should never give competitive advantage. I guess the only exception to this is floating Nautilus, but that's more of a meme these days. But yeah, that's it for the post. And that's all the news when it comes to League. So now let's move on to TFT, which also got its own video. Here it started by revealing that the next TFT set will be themed around the fantasy of good fighting evil. And it was titled TFT Reckoning. One of the new unique traits you can see in this set is Draconic. After each round with this trait, you'll get an egg, and after a while it hatches into loot. Besides this, Riot also hinted at a new mechanic, which may include recruiting leader heroes from either the good or the evil side. And the 2 examples given were the God Kings, Darius and Garen. Next they revealed an interesting new kind of unit. Little Devil Teemo will be as powerful as a legendary unit, but instead of gold, he will cost you health. So it is free power, but at what cost? And finally we got the date. Right now TFT Reckoning is planned to launch on April 28th. Then Riot revealed that they are testing out a new way to play TFT. Just like Legends of Runeterra has labs, which is essentially a special game mode with special rules, TFT might get something similar, with the first TFT lab being based around hyper-rolling. There is no gold interest, you start with 10 health, and you lose 1 HP every time you lose. These game modes may even get their own fun rating system, but the big rewards will still be reserved for the normal game. At the end of the video, they were also awesome enough to give us some numbers from 2020. Apparently, every time they released a new set, the TFT player base grew, which is interesting because even on Twitch it is not reaching any massive numbers. And still, just after 2 years, it is clear that TFT is a massive success. Because apparently, with every patch, about 10 million players play every day, which exceeded my humble expectations by quite a few people. But that's all the news we got. Now before we leave, if you go through the video again, you may notice that Riot is already teasing some champions from the new set. So here are all the champions I noticed. We will be getting Dawnbringer Riven and Nightbringer Yasuo, probably as the big good and evil units just like Garen and Darius. Then there was Kayle, Volibear, Soraka, Aatrox, Nautilus, Gragas, Shyvana, Udyr, Aurelion, Heimer, Ashe, Teemo, Draven, Nidalee, Kha'Zix, and Warwick. But that is it for TFT. Next, let's have a look at Legends of Runeterra. Since the Shuriman expansion was just released, we didn't get a lot of news there. But if you like the Lab of Legends as much as I do, just know that this game mode will be upgraded with the next patch. So we will get even more content there. Similarly in Valorant, since Astra was just revealed, together with the gun game mode, we didn't get much new info there either. But hey, at least there is some new merch in the store. And so, let's finish this video with what is happening in Wild Rift. Besides the fact that Wild Rift is preparing for the arrival of Leona and Diana, there is currently a Lux event going on, and the fact that Braum and Shyvana got new skins. We should also mention that America is getting its open beta on March 29th. So finally, everyone will be able to play. But not together. You see, unfortunately, because America is built on a different infrastructure, the world will be split into two massive regions, East and West. This means that the US won't be able to play with EU or Asia, which is shame, but it is understandable. Also, if you have VPN, you will have to confirm your region and your account will reset. So you can still play across continents, but know that you have to do it with a fresh account. But finally, that is it for this episode of Rift News. I thought it would be quick, but we still had a lot to talk about. Even though we got no word on the upcoming Ruined King game. I thought they would at least try to release it with Isolde, but since she is already being teased with the new skin line, I don't think it's possible. But you know, there is still the next champion.